We're going to be talking about a really interesting topic today. We'll be talking about trust. I really hope my video is good. Can you guys see me? Hey, I see Stacy coming on. Can you guys see me? So we usually do a streaming service when we do lives, but we've had so many challenges today. The weather has been terrible. And if you know, it's the weekend of our convention, so I'm swamped. But I had to make this live happen because I know it's one of those topics that a lot of people have requested for a while. So we're going to be diving into trust, just going over some very important basics for someone who has heard about it, someone who's been wanting to learn more about it, and is not sure where to start, okay? So as you come on, just keep joining and we will go right into the conversation, okay? So what is a trust in simple terms? Because I'm just diving in. Today, we're not going to be here for long. I want to dive right in and get the conversation started, all right? So what is a trust? In the simplest terms, I would say a trust is a vehicle. That's the easiest way I will put it. It's a vehicle. It's an amazing vehicle that you can use to control assets that you've built, to protect them, to determine how they will be treated in the event that you become incapacitated, in the event that you pass away, or just how you want your stuff to work out, okay? Before we started learning about trust, most of us knew of wills, right? When someone is still alive, they would write a will. They call it will and testament. And that's like your final wishes of how you want your assets to be distributed to the people that you're leaving behind. The only problem that always came with the will is it takes a long process. It has to go through the court system before the court system can, approve of all the assets to be distributed according to the way you wanted it. Sometimes it's a really expensive process, and it also makes your stuff public. And a lot of people don't really want to deal with that, right? And in trying to put something in place that has people not put their business out there, have some kind of protection over what happens to their assets when they pass away, a simple way for things to just flow to their dependents, the trust becomes just an incredible tool for that. So what is a trust? A trust is, I would call it a legal vehicle, right? Where a grantor, someone who chooses to set up a trust, someone who owns this, decides that they're going to hand over control of that asset, of that trust, that vehicle that they have set into the hands of someone called a trustee to help them manage it, to help them take care of it until the right time where it would be given to someone they have chosen to benefit from it, that they call a beneficiary. Okay, so there are three people involved here. There is someone who is a grantor, a person who is like, okay, when I die, I don't want my stuff to have to go through the court, right? Or I want to decide how my assets will be distributed. I want to decide who will pay taxes on those assets. For some people, it might be a vehicle to avoid to cap or reduce their estate taxes. But the end of the day is they want to have control with what happens with the assets that they've built, who it goes to, how taxes are paid, and those kind of things, okay? So this grantor sets up this very powerful vehicle, this very powerful asset called a trust, and puts all the stuff that they have that they want to be able to give to their beneficiaries one day. Then they hand over that title to someone called a trustee who would manage it for them, keep the books, file taxes if needed, and make investments as well. And then eventually will hand over to the beneficiaries. Okay, so the trustee is like an administrator, and then the beneficiaries are those that get what the grantor intended for them to get it, when he or she intended for them to get it, and how. Okay, so this is very important. These three elements must happen. Sometimes two of these can be one person. The grantor could be the trustee at some times, and I'll talk about that. But you always have these three moving parts, okay? So you always have that. So let us go. So like I mentioned, when I called it a vehicle, another word you would call a trust is a relationship, if you ask me, right? Now, there are a couple of things that a trust is, and it's very important that I break it down. But there are certain things that a trust is not. So, for example, a trust will help to protect your assets. A trust will be able to help you dictate how you want your assets to be distributed. A trust can help you save on estate taxes or certain types of taxes. A trust can even help you manage how, you know how if you have those poor kids that like to spend money too much, how much access they have to the assets you leave behind so they don't spend it all at once. A trust can control that. But there are a couple of things a trust is not. A trust is not a magic bullet that will automatically eliminate your taxes. No, that doesn't happen with a trust. And some people think a trust is only for billionaires, right? No, even the average person, well, average is subjective, okay? But the average taxpayer or individual that owns, several properties and would like to pass that, or businesses to pass that to their kids, can do that through a trust. So it must not only be something for the very wealthy. I think it's a great tool for those who want to be smart about taxes, about legacy, about wealth and estate planning. Okay, and that can be anybody, can be any of us, right? And also, it is not a replacement for a solid estate or tax planning or strategy. Okay, a trust is just one of the tools, but it's not one of those tools that answer all of your problems. Because I have had a lot of people come to me, I was on this webinar and I heard someone say you can do X, Y, and Z. When you put your assets in a trust, you don't pay any more taxes, or the trust will cover your expenses, your bills. And I'm like, who? I wish, right? So those are some things that the trust is not. And I want us to go ahead now and talk about the different types of trust, so I can really break it down for those that are thinking about a trust, right? How should you approach this? All right. So there are two things when it comes to a trust. There are two types, major types of trust. There are other types like sub ones, but there are two terminologies that I want you to get very familiar with when it comes to that conversation of trust. Okay. You have what we call a revocable trust and what we call a non-revocable trust. In fact, if you don't remember anything, this is one of your most important lessons for today when we talk about the different types of trust, okay? So a revocable trust is the kind of trust where someone would set up, they call it a living trust, and they still want to have control over the assets. They want to be able to revoke the trust. They want to make changes to the trust if it came to it, right? Like you set up a trust and then you put one of your kids, and then one day you find out this child was trying to poison you. Okay, I'm joking, but now you can take them out of your trust, okay? So a revocable trust would do that. So a revocable trust is the kind of trust where a grantor would set it up, and they want to make sure that their assets are passed on to their to their beneficiaries in the event that they die without going through probate, or maybe if they became incapacitated, they're able to have those assets transferred to their beneficiaries how they want them to be transferred, okay? Which I think is incredible. Now, here's the catch with that. Because it is revocable, it means the grantor has control of the assets in this trust. The grantor still gets to make decisions on how the assets will be managed in this trust. Because of that, the IRS does not exclude the assets placed in a trust from the grantor. Which means, in the eyes of the IRS, that trust that you set up, because it is revocable, they consider it a disregarded entity. I'll put it that way, kind of like how they treat single member LLCs. It means in the eyes of the IRS, the assets in the trust are not separate from the assets that you own as the grantor. So you as the grantor, you're still liable for the taxes of their assets. This is important because when a lot of people go and have conversations with all these people that want to that tell them about establishing a trust or things like that, many times they don't let them know that, if you choose to do, they'll tell them you save on taxes and all of that. But if they don't let them know that if you set up a revocable trust, you're still liable for the taxes on all those assets, because those assets will be reported on your personal taxes, on your 1040, okay? This is very crucial. This is very important information for you to know, all right? So now this is what we call the revocable trust. In other words, if you hear someone talking about this, you hear something, they'll say the grantor trust. Grantor means the person who created the trust, the grantor, is still liable for the taxes. So in the eyes of the IRS, it's called a grantor trust. Grantor still liable. All right. Now, The next type of trust we have is what we call the irrevocable trust. Okay, with the irrevocable trust, pretty similar to what you would be setting a revocable trust for, to be able to pass on your assets to your beneficiaries without it going through probate and all of that. The difference with the irrevocable and revocable is you do not have control once that trust has been set up and funded. Okay, so once you set up the irrevocable trust and you fund it, you cannot go back and make changes. So if that your child was trying to kill you, I shouldn't say it on live video, but if you discover that one, maybe one of the kids, oh my God, it's, now everyone is so sensitive. But let's just say you discover that one of the kids was trying to steal from you, one of your kids, and you didn't want them to be on your trust. Unfortunately, you really cannot go back and make changes to an irrevocable trust. Okay, that's the difference with the irrevocable trust and the revocable trust. Now, each of these has its benefits and its advantages and disadvantages. Remember, I said with the revocable trust, they call it a living trust. You have control over your assets in the trust. So you, as the grantor, you're still the trustee. You manage it. You decide what's going to happen to the assets until you finally pass away. Okay, so when you set up a revocable trust, you can even do it with your social security number, because it will be reported on your personal taxes. Then when you pass away, they will set up an EIN, create a new account, because now the trust will have to file its own taxes. When you set up an irrevocable trust, most of the time they will call them the non-grantor trust, because now you, the grantor, you're no longer liable for the taxes. The trust itself files and pays its own taxes. Okay, the beneficiaries, if they receive income that has been generated by the trust, they would pay their own taxes for that income that they receive on a Schedule K1. All right, I said today I'm going to make it brief because I don't want to overwhelm anyone, but I want to just lay the foundation, because these are the two most important things you need to know when it comes to trust. All right, these two things. So the first thing, you set up you can either do a revocable or irrevocable, and depending on how it's set up, either you, the grantor, will be liable for the taxes, or the trust will be liable for its own taxes. All right, and kind of now I'm already explaining how trust will get taxed. So when people tell you about creating a trust and saving taxes, which I think it's so important. I don't like when people who don't have the understanding of taxes just throw these things and make people feel like they are winning a lottery ticket when they might actually get themselves in a very complicated situation. Okay, let me explain something. So when you set up a revocable trust, yes, it will protect your assets. Yes, it won't have to go through probate. And yes, it can save on some taxes. But what nobody tells you is if your trust starts to earn money, the trust pays one of the highest tax rates, if you don't know. So now, as a US, if you're in the US, or if you're a resident in the US, or you're a US citizen, you need to earn up to almost $600,000 to be paying 37% of taxes and up. Do you know a trust? If a trust earns income over $16,000, that trust already is at 37% tax bracket. I'm talking about earning income in the trust, like earning interest, dividends. So if the trust wants to save on taxes, it has to distribute it. If it distributes it to its beneficiaries, some of that income will be taxed only at the beneficiary's tax rate, and then what is left, or what is retained in the trust, that's where the trust will be able to pay whatever tax is applicable. So it's very important to have these conversations with someone who understands. Okay, so now for someone who is listening to me, you're probably thinking, I've heard about people talking about this trust thing. Is it right for me? Should I consider setting one up? Yes and no. Here are a couple of things that I would say you should be thinking about when it comes to trust. All right. So my first thing is, if you do have a significant amount of assets, I mean, you have a solid portfolio that you would like to transfer over to your kids, and you really don't want it to have to go through the court system where it will be so expensive and take time, and you want it to be private as well, absolutely, you should consider setting up a trust. Okay, the next thing is, how much control do you really like to have? If you're someone who wants to have control over what happens, or if you're concerned that if you make a decision you're not sure you can let go, without ever having to have a say, you might want to think twice, because if you do the revocable trust, your assets will, you still pay taxes on on your assets, just as if there was no trust set up. However, down the road, it will pass on successfully. But you should not be thinking about an irrevocable trust, okay? Now, if you own a business as well, and you know your business is going to do well, and you want to pass it on to your kids, definitely something to consider. But you want to make sure that it's not maybe a business like one that needs a license, where there might be state stipulations preventing the trust from being able to have that business in it. If it's an S corp, there are certain things you want to take into consideration, but these are things you should think about. All right, if you're someone who just has one house, a 401k, and that's it, do I think you should necessarily go setting up a trust? I would be on the fence. You can still make them beneficiaries, but going through the process of setting up a trust, and then if there's interest, you have to pay those taxes plus the paperwork that it entails. I don't know if that is a smart idea. All right. Now, there's something great that the trust does for people who know that they have asset that is going to appreciate significantly. Okay. So when you put a trust in, you put an asset in a trust, it kind of holds the value of that. That's for the irrevocable trust, okay? So that value kind of stays put, where if the value appreciates, the appreciated value doesn't impact your estate taxes. So that's really great for people who know that, you know, they have assets that are gonna, you know, increase tremendously in value, and they don't want that to be part of their taxable estate, okay? Just things to think about. But for the average person, a lot of you come to me and you're like, I've heard all these things, I want to set up a trust. I really want you to think twice, because if you set up a revocable trust so you can have control, do you really get any tax advantages right now? Not really, okay? And if you're a young person and you have your whole life ahead of you, there's still so much you need to see when it comes to your kids. I don't know if you want to set up an irrevocable trust where you don't have enough power to change your mind or make certain decisions if it came to it, okay? So definitely things to think about. I was really... Yeah, okay, good. So definitely some things to think about, all right? I know I just got a notification that I need to come. I told you guys we have our convention, and it's been a crazy day. Even being able to get online has been wild. But I just wanted to set the foundation for these conversations on trust, okay? I'm going to come back and do a more detailed session, but I hope that this helps to get this conversation started for someone who's been thinking about a trust. I'm going to come back and talk about the different assets you can put into a trust and things you should think about. I know a lot of people want to put things like life insurance into their trust, which I think is great, but it's important for you to think through the different assets. I will talk about maybe the kind of documentation that you want to make sure that you're reviewing, just to be sure that you don't end up finding yourself in a tough situation. Now, of all the things I've said, the one that is crucial is if you do set up a trust, please make sure that you actually fund it, okay? Because if you set up a trust and you don't go through the process of funding the trust, you know what's going to happen? Everything I just said right now will not even matter to the courts, because the court cannot exclude something from probate that was not put in a trust. So please, for those that have already set up a trust, the fact that you went through and did that paperwork, don't get too comfortable where you're not transferring titles, you're not moving assets or funding the actual trust that you have set up, especially for the revocable trust. I see that happening a lot because there's a misunderstanding of the fact that the IRS will still tax the property under you. It doesn't mean you should not put it in the trust. Yes, the assets in the trust will still be treated as your personal assets on your 1040 for tax purposes. However, on the legal side of things, if you properly move it into the trust, when things happen and it has to be transferred to your to your beneficiaries, whatever you had stipulated in your trust will be what will happen to those assets, okay? So a few things I want you to remember from today's conversation. A trust is an incredible tool, all right? It's an incredible tool for you to decide how the assets you've built, how they will be protected, how they'll be passed on to your future generations, how they will even be taxed, right? And it's an incredible part to your wealth building strategy and your legacy strategy. Now, it's important that you decide how much control you want to have over your trust before you set one up. Because you can choose to have control on what happens to your trust, right? If you want to still be the one managing it, if you want to do that, then make sure that it's a living trust, what we call a revocable trust. However, you might not have any immediate tax benefits if you set up a revocable trust. If you're okay with relinquishing control over those assets, what will happen is they will be in a trust, and the trust will now be treated as a separate entity where it has to file and report its own taxes and pay taxes for income that is earned in that trust. So the trust will normally file what we call a 1041, and that's a tax return that is used for trust and estate taxes. So a form, yes. So that's what the trust would do, and then you would normally have a trustee that would manage it. So unlike the revocable trust, where you can be both the grantor and the trustee, like I explained earlier, with the irrevocable, most of the time you have not. Once you're done. There's a trustee who is going to manage, file the taxes, invest if needed, and ensure that beneficiaries get what they are supposed to get. Okay, the irrevocable has certain tax benefits when it comes to preserving or freezing the value of assets that you put in there. You can also decide who is going to pay the taxes. Either the estate will pay, either the trust will pay taxes, or part of the taxes can flow to beneficiaries for income earned in the trust at a lower rate. All right. So is there a one size fit all when it comes to trust? No. That's why you need to have a conversation with someone who can look into your situation, who can understand everything that you have going on and make the right recommendations for you. Stop taking advice from social media. Stop just listening to people and wanting to go with what they say. All right. Now, one thing before I go, I need to point out some of the questions that I've had people ask me is, if I set up a trust, should I dissolve my LLC or move my assets out of my LLC? You don't really have to do that. The LLC offers protection for your assets. Remember, a few weeks ago, I talked about different entity structures. The LLC provides asset protection. It's a limited liability company. It provides asset protection for those assets that you have. Now, if you were to put that in a trust, I would rather just move the ownership into the trust. So let the trust own the LLC, but not just remove the assets where now there's no protection. Okay, if that helps. All right. Well, you guys, whenever you get to watch this, I hope this really helps to start that conversation for you. It's going to be a crazy weekend. You can tell it's been a challenge even making today's live, but I wanted to keep my word because I know a few people have asked these questions and I wanted to answer those questions. Thank you all for being here.